Investors should care about climate change for a range of reasons. We're the fund manager for an insurance company. So our particular reason is that climate change is an existential risk for the insurance sector. If you think about it, we underwrite flood and fire, and some of our peers underwrite crop insurance. So climate change could lead to premiums becoming so expensive that they are effectively uneconomic. So over the coming decades, climate risk is an existential crisis to our sector. So as you can imagine, as an investor running money for an insurer, we have that particular additional focus. Any investor, though, should be worried about the materiality of climate change. It manifests in broadly three ways if you work with the Financial Stability Board. First way is physical risk. So as the climate changes, what happens to the physical environment and what are the costs or the opportunities to the asset that you own? It could be a company, it could be real estate, it could be infrastructure. The second is transition risk. So if we move away from where we're heading, which is roughly 3.5 to 4 degrees, if we move away from that and hit Paris at 2 or 1.5 degrees, which is a little bit of jargon, but essentially means we decarbonize the economy. As we make that transition, some of our investments will lose out, some of them will make a lot of money. The transition risk is the ones that are going to lose out. So knowing who is going to lose and who's going to gain, investors who are long-term, like us, need to focus on that. The third area, thought of as litigation risk. Some of the institutions that are out there will be blamed for the changing climate. We're seeing that today with a few cases around the world where governments and municipalities and companies are now going to war to pay for the consequences of the climate that's changing today. So investors should worry from a financial perspective where this stuff is material today, and they should worry about it from a financial perspective about where it's material tomorrow. Now, one study we looked at with the Economist Intelligence Unit suggested that the value at risk associated with climate change is in the order of 43 trillion, the present value, if we hit 6 degrees by 2100. And that's unlikely but plausible. And the fact that it's even plausible should be a real worry. What's likely is 4 degrees. And at 4 degrees, putting it a little glibly, the Alps look like the Atlas Mountains, and places like Alaska become valuable real estate as people move there because it becomes the place where the climate is relatively pleasant, and some of the other equatorial places become unlivable. So the investors should care about it financially. So if you don't care about the pandas or the penguins or the polar bears, you should still care about climate change. There are also investors, though, that are human and do care about those things, the environmental and social consequences. Those ones are more worried about the impact. So it's not just about being a universal owner, it's also worrying about what are the moral consequences of how people are making money today? Is it at the expense of future generations? And what should they do about that if it is? And at the moment, it is. So how do we as owners today of companies behave in a way that encourages those companies to transition away from a high carbon future and towards a low carbon future? There's various reasons why investors are concerned: microeconomic, macroeconomic, moral, and financial. I love the way the TCFD has framed it. There's 4 types of information that they've framed. The first is around strategy. So I love to know, how's the company's strategy responding to the changing risks and opportunities of climate change? That's the full main business strategy. So the strategic information matters. Second is around risk management, which relates to this. Internal controls or risk reporting, whatever it's referred to in each individual country. It's important to know how the risks are being governed across the business, not just the strategic opportunity being secured, but the risks being governed. So the second set is around risk. The third, we have a backward-looking element with key performance indicators. I imagine some of your audience will be aware of Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 emissions, the various different emissions that are related to the business's own product or their supply chain or every other element of emissions that could be relevant to their business. I like to know that because it teaches me where is the risk originating. It's not necessarily where does the risk end up, but it helps me understand where to focus our engagement work. So the third level, as I say, is key performance indicators on the history. And the fourth and the hardest is scenario planning for the future. Scenario planning as a discipline is only a few decades old. In certain sectors, it's done very well. Some oil and gas companies, some pharma and healthcare ones. But it's not pervasive. So if we get scenarios as we are now, from, for example, Exxon, BP, Walmart, Equinor, and others, the scenario tells us quite a bit about how the board's thinking. Even whether they're using the International Energy Agency or the International Panel on Climate Change scenarios as the reference, that tells us something about what future they're predicting and how they're preparing their business. So the scenario plans can tell us quite a lot about how well governed that business is. So just broadly speaking, we look at strategy, governance, key performance indicators, and scenario planning. Those are the 4 levels that we look for. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good enough. Over the last 2 decades, since the incarnation of the Carbon Disclosure Project back in 2001, there are now thousands of companies that are trying to disclose this data better, and in doing that, manage it better. And of course, it's all about managing what you measure. And in this case, it matters massively, not just to the company, but also people in the planet beyond. So don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. It's incredibly complicated. If you really start to look at this, it can become overwhelming in its scale. And honestly, when you engage with it intellectually, there can be emotional consequences of that too. And you start to get quite worried about what the future may have in store, not just for future generations, but also for your own retirement. So don't be overwhelmed. There are thousands of companies that have done good thinking and good work in this space. Of course, I'd point to CDSB, CDP as good places to start for guidance. It's exactly what all of this is about. The TCFD itself, particularly the scenario planning piece, is known to be challenging. It's known to be difficult, so do what you can. Our business, Aviva's own TCFD reporting, is now in its 3rd incarnation. It's got better each year. It's not perfect, but it's good enough. So don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good enough.